Good evening, chatters. Welcome back to Alveus Bug Hunt. Ooh, we've got a star already. We'll come back to you, bud. But hello, Nikki and Logan and Russian and LPB and Topplebell and Vic and Google, Tired Cat, Lazy McKay, Silky Floor, Sam, Honeybee, Emerald Pigeon, Silvera, Fuzzy Emu, There is 120, Roxers, hello, Fossilbot, Stream Elements, my favorite robots are here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're starting off strong. We've got a dung beetle here. Oh, Chaos, Even Star, Sleepy Bunny, hello, hello. He is a bit uncoordinated. Don't like hot weather, but I see the bugs being active again. I was I was very pleased with our diversity of stuff that we saw last week. Um, I was surprised just by how cold it had been the week before, how much different stuff we saw last week, and even some of the new stuff. I don't know that we had seen many centipedes before, so I thought that was a rather good chats. If I do say so myself. Uh, Marrow on the Thon. Is that safe for the animals? The dung beetle? If that's what you're asking, yes. The answer is absolutely yes. Dung beetles are an incredibly important part of the environment. A lot of people only have this image of dung beetles being like native to Africa, uh, primarily because of the Egyptian association with scarabs and dung beetles and things like that. But there are many, many, many species that are native to North America, and they help us deal with all of the accumulated waste. There were certain species that have been introduced to try to collectively deal with the massive amount of cow dung. Um, Alveus doesn't really have that problem because they muck every day. But if this was a natural system, we would need those dung beetles to help get rid of those dung piles. And so the way that they get rid of them, there are three different like classes of dung beetles. There are the tunnelers, so they will find the dung and dig straight down and then take a piece of the dung down with them. There are the rollers, which are the ones that you're probably most familiar of and you think of when I say dung beetle. The ones that will go to the poop, grab a ball of it, and roll it away, and then tunnel down. And then you have the dwellers, which are going to be generally your very small dung beetles. They dig into the dung, but then they just kind of stay there. They don't really take it anywhere. But dung beetles taking that dung away from the main source, they do that because they're using it to raise their offspring. They will take that pellet of poop down into their burrow, lay an egg on it, and then that is what the larva feeds off of after it hatches. Those little dung balls getting incorporated back into the soil is actually a really important component of the nutrient cycling in a lot of the habitats and ecosystems because it's like they're taking fertilizer down below the surface directly to the plant roots. So if you think about that, after that larva is done feeding on that dung, there's still going to be some left over in the soil that's going to allow the nutrients from that dung to disseminate back into the root systems of all of the plants. In the same, at the exact same time as they're doing that and releasing this nutritious dung back into the ground, they're also aerating the soil by building their tunnels. So yes, dung beetles are quite an important part of the whole system here. It's a little bit less obvious when you have keepers that come and scoop it up every day. But in a natural system, this is where a lot of the dung goes, is that dung beetles will come and take it. And there are different species that will specialize on the dung of different organisms. Um, a lot of them are generalists. The ones that we're looking at right now don't appear to be specialized in any way. But there are some of the smaller dung beetles will specialize on deer dung, which are those little pellets. So it's kind of pre-rounded for them to be able to roll it away. But then you also have things like the elephant dung beetle, Heliocopterus no, Cerciel, Heliocopterus. Yeah, that's right. Um, they're called elephant dung beetles because they're really, really big, but also because they need elephant dung to reproduce. Because they're so big, there's not really many other organisms that's dung is as large that it would be able to support a population of these beetles. So the beetles need the elephants, and the habitat in general needs the beetles so they can get rid of all of the elephant dung. There was a paper that came out probably 2024, I would think. I think a year or two ago, where they looked at elephant dung and counted the dung beetles in 1 kilogram of the elephant dung and extrapolated that out to however much dung an elephant produces a day. And then the end result was that it was something like a single elephant can produce enough dung to sustain over 2 million individual dung beetles every day. A single elephant. Now, elephants are in decline. They're not doing the best population wise, but just imagine a herd of 20 elephants that's supporting over 40 million dung beetles per day. And there was another cool paper that had come out a few years before this where they actually used the gut contents of the dung beetles to do environmental monitoring. So they would collect the dung beetles, dissect them, get their gut contents out, and basically DNA sequence the poop. And they were then able to tell what mammals were in a certain area based on the poop contents of the dung beetle's stomach. Hello, Momtomology. Welcome in. That is a lot of poop. You are so right, Evenstar. Now we've got a spider here glowing. Probably one of our little spider friends. The legs look a little spindly to me, but there's a lot of different little spider species out there. How can you tell if a dung beetle is male or female? Good question, Honeybee. Oftentimes, male dung beetles will have horns or ornamentation of some sort. In beetle world, horns and ridges and things like that are used in male-male competition. So think of it like the antlers on a deer. And so the males that have bigger horns are able to better defend their territory. And when it comes to dung beetles, their thing that they're protecting is the tunnel with the dung ball. So males will oftentimes guard the entrance to their tunnel that has the dung ball at the bottom with the female sitting on it. And any other males that try to go into its tunnel and take its female are going to get fought with their really big horns. This poses a problem, though, for male dung beetles that maybe don't have as big of a horn set. And so they've actually developed a really cool way of getting around this system. Imagine you're a puny little dung beetle male, and you don't have a very big horn because you didn't have a lot of good nutrition as a larva. It's going to be hard for you to win that direct competition with a male who has a much larger horn. So instead, what you do is you sneak around the back door. Instead of confronting the male directly and trying to go straight down his original tunnel, you'll become what they call a sneaker male. And you will tunnel down alongside the tunnel that he is currently guarding, dig down a little bit, and eventually cross over into his tunnel. So rather than having to take him on head on, you are sneaking in behind him, in which you could then potentially mate with the female that's there at the bottom or reclaim the dung ball that he has already taken. So this is an actual, like, legitimate reproductive strategy to be a sneaker male, essentially, is to you don't have the chops to really fight it out, but you still want the chance to pass on your genetic material. So you sleep. Mr. Steal Your Girl. Exactly, Lyndon. Horn size is determined on larval nutrition. Yes. Really, that's funny. Yeah, so unlike in deer, like the example that we're following, the similar situations in mammals, deer antlers are often changed and influenced genetically. Males with big horns will produce, or sorry, excuse me, antlers. Males with big antlers will generally produce offspring that have bigger antlers. But for insects, a lot of the necessary things for them to develop come through when they're growing as larvae. And so the nutrition that they get, the quality of the nutrition, the quality of the dung that they had as a larva, is generally going to enhance the size of their horn. So if your egg is laid in some low quality dung, you're probably going to end up being a small horned male. But if you are the offspring of a small horned male that has somehow weaseled his way into a really primo pile of dung for you to feed on as a baby, you can come out having a much bigger horn than your father did. A lot of insect size is based on nutrition. And you'll see the same thing with caterpillars. Butterflies and moths will generally have an average size, right? You're like, oh yeah, this is like a normal size for this butterfly. But you can end up seeing members of that same species that are just a lot smaller than average, and a lot of the time that has to do with inadequate nutrition. They can still complete their development, but because they don't have the resources to fully bulk up and get large as a caterpillar, they can still struggle through that last metamorphosis change where they go from caterpillar or to adult. I'm getting pings. I'm sorry. Train of thought. It's coming back. Okay, yes. So you can see smaller individuals of the same species, oftentimes relating to the amount of food or the quality of the food that they got as an immature. You see this a lot in wood boring beetles as well. So things like jewel beetles and longhorn beetles. Dead wood is a very specific type of resource, and not all dead wood is created equal. Some of the wood that is like moist and rotting and filled with good fungus and bacteria and sometimes even other beetle larvae, that's like the really good dead wood to grow up in. But if your egg was laid in a rather dry log or in a log that looked promising, but then something happened where the canopy opened and now the log that you are in is in full sun getting baked, you can see like 2 or 3 times size differences in the same species from things that occur from the same species. You can see individuals that are 2 or 3 times larger than others, and it's all just based on the quality of their food that they've got going in. Some seriously gourmet wood, yeah. Good soup, right? Good wood, good log. But yeah, so that was my dung beetle soapbox. Thank you all for attending. I did see another really good question. Sam, have you talked about Magnolia grandiflora and how it's pollinated by beetles? If that's a legit thing from being such an old type of tree that it got pollinated by beetles versus the usual pollinators. Oh, yes. We can talk about magnolias. What's the most nutrient dense wood? I don't know, Lord Ping. I also saw that you said it was your first chat, so hello, welcome in. Um, it depends on the species, right? Not all species will lay eggs in the same types of wood. So there are longhorn beetles that are like specifically oak borers, and then you have other longhorn beetles that are specifically hickory borers. For those species in particular, they target that particular species of wood. So I don't know if one is necessarily better or worse. It's just different for different species. Now, there are species that are polyphagous, meaning that they can feed in um, many different types of plants or on many different types of wood. And I, offhand, can't think of anything where we've shown that one is necessarily better than the other. But that is a good question, Lord Ping. I can try to look into that to see if there's any backing there. Best nutrient tree for B. But now to Sam's of magnolias. Yes. So magnolias are. Ooh, are we back on robots? Okay. We good. All good. Yes. Okay. So Nicole, Lyndon, if I misspeak on this plant thing, please let me know. Um, Plants evolved a very long time ago, and some of the earliest plants are things like your liverworts, and then you turned into mosses, and then things like ferns showed up, and then plants developed seeds. So ferns and mosses reproduce by spores, and oftentimes the way that they connect the gametes, so connecting the sperm and the egg of the plant, is through like water pollination. As it rains, the spores and things like that are knocked off and all mixed around on the moss, and that's how they get sperm or get genetic material transferred between one plant and the other. Then seeds developed. The earliest seed plants are what are called gymnosperms. Those are going to be, think about things like your pine trees. They have seeds, so they have a compacted, specific structure that they can produce that will then produce new offspring that can be carried away by, a squirrel or bird or something eating that seed. Gymnosperms are oftentimes wind pollinated. So I don't know about other places, but at least here in Florida, certain times of the year, my car is like completely yellow in the morning because all the pine trees have just released pollen overnight. So gymnosperms are oftentimes wind pollinated. And then you have the most recent of the evolution in the line of plants thing is flowering plants. So flowers are a structure that helps with the reproduction of the plant. In normal, like pollination syndromes, you have the nectar as a reward, and you use the nectar to attract a pollinator. The pollinator then shows up to get that reward and just happens to get covered in your pollen. And when it is going from plant to plant, it is incidentally taking your genetic material around. That is the gist of how pollination works. But when I say pollinator, you're oftentimes thinking about bees and flies and butterflies. What Sam had brought up was magnolias. And in the context of flowering plants, magnolias were some of the earliest developing. They were some of the first flowers. As opposed to as opposed to other things like your dandelions and tulips and whatnot. Those are evolved much later in the timeline of plant evolution. What that means for their pollinators, though, is that all of the common pollinators that we think of today, like bees and wasps and butterflies, they simply did not exist yet. Beetles evolved about 330 million years ago, while we didn't see the evolution in Hymenoptera until about 280 million years ago. So beetles had an approximately 50 million year jump on Hymenoptera on being like the dominant life form. And so a lot of those early plants were evolving to have pollinators that were not ants, bees, wasps, and butterflies. The original pollinators for a lot of these flowering plants were beetles. And because magnolias were some of the earliest evolving plants, they make sense that they have one of the earliest evolving pollinators in the form of beetles. What makes magnolia flowers special, though, is that they've basically adapted to deal with having the not super the super agile, super specified pollinators that you get with the coevolution of like moths and orchids, for instance. Beetles are not designed to access the nectar at the base of the flower. Beetles are there to feed on the very nutrient and very protein dense pollen that these plants produce. And so, if you are a plant, it seems counterintuitive to produce pollen that makes insects come to eat your pollen. But the insects that come to eat your pollen are also probably going to be the ones that are carrying your pollen from plant to plant. So, first thing that magnolias have to deal with is that they produce a lot of pollen. They have to because some of it is going to get eaten, and the rest of it they need to try to get taken to a different plant. The other thing that you have to deal with is that beetles for an insect are quite heavy. So rather than have these very thin, dainty flower petals, the petals on a magnolia are a lot thicker. They're almost leathery. They're not succulent. They're not like super thick like you would see on a cactus or a euphorbia, but they are still quite thick for a flower petal. And that's because they need to be able to support the weight of the beetle and probably multiple beetles at once trying to access the pollen. But again, one other thing that magnolias have to do to attract the beetles, like I said, aren't there for the nectar. So they're very good at visiting male flowers, but what incentive do beetles have to visit female flowers? There are plants that are dioecious, which means that the male and female sexes are on different plants. But even to get to different parts of the flower, why would a beetle go there? The answer is that the magnolia lies to the beetle a little bit. Magnolias are thermogenic, which means that they can produce. Whoa. We got an ant party going on. What did they find? Whoa. They're going in on something. It looks like a drop piece of food or something. It's shiny. It looks almost like a drop piece of fruit or something. That they would be swarming it like that. They found the bug picnic. That makes sense if it's in Push Pops. Yeah, it might be a piece of Push's apple. Well, that's a loaded food source for the ants. Tasty, tasty. Let me finish my thought about magnolias before we get too far into the ants. Um, the thing that magnolias do to convince beetles to visit the female flowers, even though there is no reward, no pollen reward there for them, is that magnolias can actually produce a little bit of their own heat. They're thermogenic, so they can actually create a little bit of warmth, and that little bit of warmth is just enough to aerosolize some of their volatile smell compounds. So as the flower heats up, it gets progressively more fragrant, the smell gets stronger, and so that smell lures the beetle to the flower, even though there's no pollen reward there for them. So the flower heating up sort of tricks the beetle to come in and basically incidentally pollinate these magnolias. So that whole system is just like really, really crazy. Because, like I said at the very beginning, it's very likely when you say pollinator that you're going to be thinking of like bees and flies and butterflies and things like that. But beetles are some of the original insect pollinators. And there are a lot of different types of beetles that do incidental pollination, where they're on the flowers for different reasons. They're not necessarily there feeding on the pollen or whatever, but they're just landing on the flowers. And then they will incidentally take some pollen to other plants in the area. So they're helping, even though they don't necessarily always mean to. Mean there, in quotes. Why is one of the ants bringing hay instead of taking food? Well, he's doing his best. She is doing her best. We talked a lot actually about ants last week because we saw that one queen wandering around. These are not going to be queen ants. There's a bunch of them together. This is an established colony, probably one that had been founded last year. These large ones that we're seeing now are majors. They're majors, they're soldiers, they're the ones that are out with the foragers to help protect them from some of the other things that are out here. So those are soldier ants, but all of the ants that you see doing work for the colony are going to be female. Male ants basically reproduce and then do nothing. They die off, and that's it. An ant colony consists of one queen and then all of the workers that she bears in her lifetime, which can be several million ants. They are all her daughters. So all of those ants that you see there on the piece of apple there are going to be female, but they're also all going to be sisters, which is pretty cool. Why are the ants bringing hay instead of taking food? I don't know, Logan. I thought maybe it was like clearing the way for them to start taking some of the food back, but it really was just carrying the hay towards the apple. So maybe that was just trying to look like it's busy at work, but not really do anything. Random question, but are there weevils on your property? Marwilla, almost certainly. I don't know where your property is, but weevils are the most diverse group of beetle on the planet. So there are about 450,000 described species of beetle, and over 65,000 of those are going to be weevils. Weevils diversified, talking about this plant interaction with insects that we were just discussing. Weevils diversified with flowering plants. So as flowering plants evolved, there were beetles that took advantage of all of these new plants out there. And so that's how you get these specialized weevils that can only feed on certain plants. And so, without having any background or any context, I will almost guarantee that you have weevils on your property somewhere. But weevils can be quite tiny, and some of them also don't have that super long, exaggerated snout that you might be accustomed to with weevils. But yes, weevils on your property, almost guaranteed. I didn't know ants eat fruit. Oh yeah, Stormlover. They'll eat whatever. They need a bit of a balanced diet, just like we do. Some ants have specialized things that they do tend to feed on more often, but ants will eat other insects. They will eat fruit. You oftentimes see them on like urban sidewalks eating candy or gum or chips or whatever food that humans have dropped. So they're very opportunistic. They can and will eat just about anything. But then you have ants that have specialized diets. Things like the fungus growing ants that have literal gardens of fungus down in their colony that they feed off of, that they tend to raise their fungus to then feed to the rest of the colony. So carpenter ants, which is what I think those ones on the apple there were, are fairly general. So they will have a wide variety of things. They would feed on other insects as well, but certainly that piece of apple is providing them with a lot of sugar, but also with a lot of moisture, which is another thing that they need to take back. Why do giraffe weevils look like that? You can't just ask why they look like that. Listen, I'm assuming you're talking about the Madagascar ones, the ones that are like red with a really long neck. Because giraffe weevil actually refers to a couple of different things. Um, there's the New Zealand one, which has the really long rostrum, versus the Madagascar one that has like the really long neck. Um, the giraffe weevil in Madagascar is a member of the family Atalabidae, which are the leaf rolling weevils. And the males have that really exaggerated neck for male male competition. So it goes back to what we were talking about with the dung beetles and having that horn. The giraffe weevils in New Zealand in Madagascar will use their long necks to kind of fight each other for access to females and resources. The New Zealand giraffe weevil is actually a different family of weevil. It's a brentid, so it's a straight snouted weevil. And all of the length on a New Zealand weevil is basically in front of the eyes. They have really, really long rostrums, which means that their mouth parts are really, really far away from the rest of their head. But in their case, it's the same thing. It's an elongated structure that ends up being like a secondary sex character that they use to compete with other males for access to territory or to females. So the New Zealand giraffe weevils will also use their exaggerated bodies to fight with other males, but rather than using the neck, they're basically fencing with their very, very long faces. So, I have both of those noted down in the Chat's recap thing for next week. So I will try to find videos. I know they exist of those different giraffe weevils, and so we can see the difference in how they fight and how they use their exaggerated bodies to fight for access to females. Secondary sex character sounds like a band name. That's funny. Okay, so we have ants. We have a nice little inchworm there. Slugs. I saw Stormlover. Are slugs related to snails? Yes. They're both gastropods, which means stomach foot. So gastro is stomach and pod is foot. They are not insects, and they are not particularly closely related to insects. I've said before in the past like couple weeks that slugs are bug adjacent. I wouldn't classify them as a quote unquote bug in the broad sense because they don't have an exoskeleton, but they are in the realm of like small quote unquote creepy crawly things that people might call a bug, but I would never personally call a slug a bug. But yeah, slugs and snails are pretty closely related. The body form of what a slug is and what a snail is has evolved multiple times. So, slug and snail, I don't think are like actually meaningful evolutionary categories. So, there are certain groups that have that elongate, squishy, soft body that are slugs, but they're not necessarily directly related to the other ones that share that body plan. So, bug adjacent, but they are relatively close to one another. And there is even a third category that most people don't know about. And if someone wants to plug the bug cord for me, uh, Storm Lover, if you're interested, there is a Discord for the Alveus kind of insect enthusiasts. And 2 weeks ago, maybe three at this point, we talked about semi slugs. And semi slugs look exactly like you would imagine the transition of something from a slug to a snail. They either have a really long body with a very tiny shell on top that they can't retract into, or they will have basically just a little shield of a shell on top. So it'll look like a slug, but with just like the very basal development part of a shell. And those are also their own category. They're not the transition between slugs and snails. It just looks like it. But most people don't know about semi slugs, and I think they're neat. Can an ant solo a slug? Probably not, Topplebell. Slugs are slimy and generally pretty big. And if you are slimy, you would generally gunk up the mandibles of whatever's trying to eat you. So I think a singular ant would probably have a hard time with a slug. A colony of ants, though, could almost certainly do it. One of the crazy things about ants and why they're so, like, sort of overpowering in nature is just like you saw them swarming on that apple piece, imagine that was another organism. You're a grasshopper or a spider or a beetle or something that is getting attacked by ants. You are just one other critter. While those ants can have dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of other ants to throw at you. So even if you do kind of fight your way through the front line, there's going to be more ants coming, and now there's also probably alarm pheromone out there because you were beating up on the first line of ants. So as a group, I think ants could take down a slug. On its own, I do think the slug deals with the ant just fine. Thank you. Thank you for the bug cord plugs. Thank you, thank you. Is that the one that almost looks like a saddle on a slug? Yes, Google, it is. That's the semi slug. Oh, we've got another wolf spider here. Okay. He's hiding out under that leaf. This one's a little bit more obvious, and I know I was talking about magnolias earlier when there was another wolf spider on screen. We had that straight top-down view of one that had the nice dorsal stripe on it. The way that we can tell, especially in the IR with these cameras, that we're looking at a wolf spider is because of that eye shine. Wolf spiders are one of the largest families of spider worldwide. There's over 200 species of different wolf spider in the US alone. And so if this does not quite look like the wolf spiders that you're accustomed to in your area, rest assured, there are multiple species. But all wolf spiders are very active predators. And because of that, they have enlarged eyes. And just like you see with other predators that are generally nocturnal, like the wolf dogs and like cats and things like that, they have a special membrane in the back of their eye called the tapetum lucidum that basically takes the light in and reflects it back onto whatever the insect equivalent of the rods and cones are to essentially give them better nighttime vision. But uh, what that lens does in the back of the eye is it reflects it out, so you're able to see that eye shine, uh, like we are right now on the cameras. Wolf spiders are not the only spiders that have that, but they are the most common ones that we have seen out here on the cameras with the eye shine. Some of the other groups that we've seen have it, but their eyes are actually a little bit smaller. So wolf spiders have a really big pair of eyes on the back row. Spiders will generally have 8 eyes, 4 kind of in the front and 4 kind of in the back. The back middle pair of eyes are greatly enlarged on wolf spiders. And so when we see that like really big concentrated reflection on the spider, like we were on that guy before he moved onto the leaf, we can be pretty sure that it was a wolf spider rather than some other type of smaller spider or some other type of spider that has smaller eyes in general. Wild to me that the most of Hymenoptera is solitary when being social is insanely OP. I need to look at 50% of that sentence. Even star. So what Lyndon was saying there, Hymenoptera is the order that includes ants, bees, and wasps. So, ooh, big beetle. Please come out. That's a big old ground beetle. This is the group that I work on, guys. This is my guy. Ooh, Raiders, thank you. Welcome in. Just in time for the bug show. Of course, it had to run into the bush where we can't really see it, but hopefully it comes out again, maybe get a little bit of a better view. Granola, do Huntsman spider eyes glow? Yes, they do. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to give you like an 85% on that one. It's been a while since I've seen a huntsman, but I do believe their eyes glow. But huntsmen, in general, have 2 pretty equal rows of eyes. They don't have any eyes that are very obviously larger than the others. And so, aside from them pretty much being flat up against a wall or up like on a vertical surface, which most wolf spiders also wouldn't do, yeah, I think you could tell just by the formation of the shine what type of spider it was. He's coming out. He's coming. I think this is Passamachus, which is one of the common name is warrior beetle. They've got really broad heads, and oftentimes the rim of their neck area and also of their elytra or their wing covers is usually rimmed with like a blue color. Yes, that's exactly what this is. So do you see those really big mandibles up in the front? They're like these 2 curved structures that point together right in the front of the beetle's face. And that indicates a little bit about what these beetles do. Aside from the common name being warrior beetle, ground beetles in general are a predatory group. So, like I said, this is the group that I work on. There are 2,500 species of ground beetle in the United States and about 40,000 species of ground beetle worldwide. And in general, they are predatory. There are certain groups that feed on seeds, But the vast majority of them are going to be feeding on other organisms of some sort. What those other organisms are varies a lot, though. Passamacus, so the one we're looking at right now, is a generalist predator. It will eat just about anything that it comes across. But there are other species, things like Scaphanotus, which is a usually pretty bright metallic purple ground beetle. They have really long faces with really long mandibles because they're snail specialists. They will specifically feed on snails, and they have these extra long mandibles to reach into the snail shells to be able to pull it out. But then you also have Promechognathus, which is a very cool, like, Pacific Northwest ground beetle. It's up in, like, central to northern California and all the way up through Vancouver and things like that. It has even longer mandibles because they are millipede predators. So what they do is they will... Uh-oh. Logan's stuck. So what Promechognathus will do is they track down the flat-backed millipedes, the ones that do produce cyanide. And they will crawl on top of these beetles, or on top of these millipedes, and use their super long mandibles to essentially decapitate the millipede. They will chunk the pieces of the millipede off, go down and feed on it. Once they reach the extent that they can reach with their mandibles, they will crawl up on top and cut another piece. So very cool adaptations physically to dealing with the millipedes, but also physiologically, they have to deal with that chemical defense that the millipedes have. Those millipedes produce cyanide, and in an open environment, they can produce enough cyanide to kill some of their other potential predators. Promechognathus, this ground beetle that is very specifically made for eating the cyanide-producing flatback millipedes of the Pacific Northwest, can survive higher than 15%, or not 15%. They can survive 15 times more concentration of cyanide than the level that kills all of the other ground beetles in that area. So they are just like super specifically geared towards eating those flatback millipedes. And it's a very, very cool system. But Passamacus there, the one we just lost under the mud chunk or poo pile, I'm not actually sure what that is there in that corner. He is just a generalist predator and will eat pretty much whatever he can get his little mandibles on. I saw a dead one of these this morning being eaten by ants. It's a bug eat bug world. Oh, the Passamacus? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ants, like I said, they can overpower things that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be able to. Or, something else could have happened to the beetle. Somebody might have stepped on it or could have just died naturally and the ants got to it. But ants are also not very picky. They will pretty much eat whatever is available at any given time. But like I said earlier about the ground beetles, even though the vast majority of them are predatory, there are still some that will feed on seeds, and they will almost exclusively feed on seeds, to the point where not only is it the adults specifically feeding on seeds, where adults are like the most mobile of the stages of a ground beetle generally, but the adults will actually bring back seeds and cache them. So they will make like seed stores, and then those seed stashes will feed the larvae. So the adults go out and they forage food, bring it back for their offspring to feed on, and they're not bringing back a prey item like, they could bring back a dead bug, but they don't really feed on dead bugs. Uh, those ones very specifically do feed on seeds. So it is a very diverse group. Like I said, 2,500 species in the US and about 40,000 worldwide. So it's actually the third largest family of beetle in the world, just behind weevils and just behind rove beetles, which both have over 60,000. So there's a pretty big gap from getting to. Oh, it's raining. Oh, we're Mr. System. Hello. Oh, Lyndon's making it rain. We got spots on the camera now, which is not ideal. We could play around with this maybe next week. Right at the end here, I don't know if it'll do much, but Marwilla, sorry for the odd question, but as a forensic science student, I'd like to know what bugs are often present near bodies. Whoo boy. Uh, maybe we could save this for next week. Um, there is a whole subset of entomology that deals with forensics. Um, there are so many options that we could talk about here. Some of the highlights that you would think of would be flies. So just like the normal flies that show up when something dies, you can use the development cycle of the flies to gauge how long something has been dead. So sometimes when they find, a body in a park or something like that, and it's still fresh, they can tell based on how warm it has been in a certain area, how long that specific species of fly takes to develop normally at a certain temperature. So if it was 75 degrees and they collect the fly larvae at a certain stage, and they know that it takes X number of hours or X number of days for this species of fly to get to, a third instar at 75 degrees, they can give you a time of how long that body has specifically been out in an area. Flies are just the starters. They are the first ones generally to colonize a body when it gets found. They will lay their eggs around any sort of openings. So typically they will go for like the eyes and the nose and the mouth. But they can also use the hot spots of where fly larvae, the maggots, are concentrated. So if there is a body that's out there and it has all of the normal amounts of flies like around the eyes and the nose and stuff, but then there's also a really large concentration of flies on like the stomach, that might be an indication that there was some sort of wound there, like a stab wound or a gunshot or something like that. So they can use the presence of the maggots on the body to potentially see where there was trauma before the body, was put out there. But yeah, who did ask this? Marwilla, if you will be here next week, we can talk more about forensic entomology because not only are there flies, but there are beetles that they can use, and the sequence of beetles and the different beetles that'll show up at different stages of decomposition is a very in-depth and a very cool topic. We just simply do not have the time for it tonight. If you also want to join the bug cord, you can do that, and I can post some resources in there if we don't get to it a little bit later. But that is a very good question, and we could probably do a whole chats on that, just because there is so much. So we'll hang on to that one. We'll put a pin in that maybe and bring it back next week. But we have the main guy in CSI is an amateur entomologist. Yes, Toppelbell, actually. And I worked in a lab during my undergrad where they made the posters that hang up in the back of his office. So, kind of cool, full circle, weird connection that I have to the CSI shows. Nothing beyond that, but there is a lot of forensic entomology, and there's a lot of different things that we could get to with that. So, pretty neat. Lyndon loves flies. Yeah. Def being here next week. Okay, great. Let's plan for that then. Easy way to start off, at least. We can talk about forensic entomology stuff. And since we know what we're going to talk about in advance, I can also probably give Logan a couple of pictures. Obviously nothing graphic, so don't worry about it being gross out, yucky. But pictures of the flies or of the beetles or whatever we end up talking about. So I can definitely put that together for next week. Haha, horsefly. Nice, Casual. Nice. All right. Well, I think that one went really fast. I feel like we were not here that long. But that just meant that we had a lot of good conversation going on. Time flies. Time flies when we're having fun. But great. Thank you again, as everyone, and thank you as always for being here and joining me for another Bug Hunts here at Alveus. Thank you. Huge shout out to Logan, our wonderful camera operator, for helping us out, getting us on the bugs. If you're interested in more Alveus adjacent bug content, there is a Discord. Exclamation point bug cord will get you there. And it is a general insect enjoyers Discord, but mostly with the Alveus community. So we're there throughout the week. If you have a burning question that simply cannot wait till the next week's chats, people will post what they're finding. Other people will help with IDs. If you get a cool t-shirt or see any cool bug merch or anything like that, we have channels for all of that sort of stuff. So please come join us if you're interested in extracurricular bug information as well. Also, part of that Discord, there is a role selection channel. If you go there, you can select the role that lets you know when I personally go live on Twitch. I do stream, and it is usually entomology content. I have a microscope set up that is hooked up to the Twitch stream, so you guys are able to see what stuff looks like under the microscopes. We do a lot of specimen work, and I talk through a lot of how to identify things. My schedule is not as regular right now because I am in the final few weeks of wrapping up my PhD. So I need to be focusing on that more so than streaming at the moment. But hopefully a little bit later this year, we will be back on a more normal schedule. But I will probably do a couple more working streams in the meantime. I have writing that I need to get done. So if you're interested in that, you can follow me on my channel, check out the Discord, get the notifications, stop by, say hello. It'd be great to see you all. Alveus Clips channel, run by one of our other wonderful community members. They upload the good clips of the animals in case you miss stuff while you're at work, kind of the highlights as the name suggests. all the good stuff that you might miss while you were at work during the day or just not watching cams for whatever reason. And then, oh, getting some new dung beetle bait. um, and yeah, the last thing, rounds. So in about an hour, Logan is going to check on all of the animals one more time before we all kind of head off to bed. So stick around for that. We'll do one more nightly pass at all of the enclosures just to make sure everything and everybody is okay. And that's all I've got. Thank you all again for hanging out this evening. It was fun. I will be back same time, same place next week with information on forensic entomology. We'll start with that next week. But like I said, if you have any other questions in the meantime, direct them in the bug cord. We'll hang out and probably answer them in there way before we get here to Chat Chats next week. So everyone stay safe, make good decisions. I will see you back here next week. Good night, everyone.